So the first thing I want to talk about is a casting document, because a lot of times if some of you are really new to VO and they don't even, you don't know what's what. So for a casting document, that's really important. And a lot of times I always find that people, like producers, come to me at the very last minute, and a lot of times I ask, well, hey, why do you come to me now? Why not earlier? It's like, oh, well, we didn't have some of the assets, and inevitably they say, well, we don't have any dialogue written yet. And one of the things is just a lot of this stuff, just make it up. If you have even a general sense of the character, just fill it in and make it up. And so for one of the last things I worked on was Activision's King's Quest. And one of the best things to include on a casting document, and the casting document is what goes to the agents, to the actors, that they're going to read the sides, and you're going to go back and review them. So the first thing I always do is try to include some pictures. And in this case, there's two of them here. One of them is an artist rendering, and the other one is actual the model. And I like, in this case, it's nice to have both, because the artist rendering gives me a feel for the tone and the quality of the project. And then seeing the actual model is also nice, because a lot of times I'll get this sense of what the ambiance is like, and then I'll see the model, and it's very going to be pixelated, and it's going to be very kind of low fidelity. And that also gives me some information about how that voice is going to fit with the image. So that's one of the most important things to really help an actor get into the part, is to actually see it. The other thing that is going to become important is obviously the voice description. In this case, it was Old Graham. The voice should be warm, slightly grizzled, with a hint of youthfulness piercing through. After all these years, the old man still has hung on to his humor and his charm. Graham's voice is a voice that you would love to hear narrate your favorite fairy tales. He speaks with a twinkle in his eye and a great sense of adventure. The reason I like that is because as much as he gives you a kind of a sense of the sound of it, also more importantly, they're conveying how does this character want, how does he make you feel, what's his emotional life like. And then in a casting document, what's really important is to include prototypes. And in this case, I like that they gave 2 prototypes, because a lot of times you'll say, yeah, well, and because what happens with a prototype, it just cuts through a lot of the haze. And if they say, hey, I want Donald Sutherland, you're like, oh, Donald Sutherland, he's going to be old, he's going to have texture, he's going to have this kind of storyteller feel to him. And so it really helps to then focus like the agent and the actor on kind of a general sense of what you're going for. The reason I like this casting document is that they gave 2 prototypes, because a lot of times if you give just one, like we want like a Christopher Walken, what happens is you get a lot of Christopher Walkens. Everyone, they're going to try to do their Christopher Walken, and that's not what you want. So in this case, they coupled it with Jeff Bridges. And so between Jeff Bridges and Donald Sutherland, you're starting to get a really clear sense of the energetics of what you want in a voice, and I find that really helpful. And it also helps to focus me on what I'm looking for to help the client, and also gives a way of us to get on the same page. And so a lot of times when I'm helping even develop a casting document, if I have an option to do that, is I'm going to say, well, give me an actor who you think embodies not only the sound but the energy of the character. And then finally, the other thing about it is, now when it comes to sample dialogue, a lot of times people will give just 30 lines of dialogue, and you really only need at most 10 lines. You don't need a lot. And I always get like, well, we don't have any, just make them up. And then the thing you want to do is, keep in mind when you're creating a casting document, you want to create the most, so whatever the emotional range of the character, you want to have those lines. So if the character is going to do a lot of shouting, you're going to want to have some shouting lines. If you're going to have the character do some very quiet lines and some intimate lines, some emotional lines, you're going to also want to layer in those kind of qualities. And so in the cast doc, let's say those 10 lines, you're going to want to cover the whole, not only the dynamic range of yelling to quiet, but also emotional from, let's say, angry to sad, for example. Anything that you can do to help get a sense of, is this actor going to cover the range that I need him to? That's going to be really important. And really, that's about, and then in those lines, what you can do that's also going to help a lot is to provide context in the line. So sometimes if the line is, go over there, that doesn't give the actor much to go on. But if you say you've been badly wounded and you're secretly trying to tell your partner to get to safety, then that actor is going to have a good sense of what he wants to do with that line, which then leads me to, so I'm going to move out of kind of casting document and move into when you're directing talent. I call it like the golden triangle. So when I'm directing talent, there's 3 things I focus on. One is what's the character doing? The other one is the relationship, and the other one is the context. And if you focus on those 3 things, more chances out of not, I don't need to give them like, hey, can you do it a little quieter, or can you do it a little like, can you be more dynamic? Because that really doesn't help the actor really get a sense of why you're doing it. Now, to belabor it too much isn't really going to be helpful either, but a little bit will help. So, for example, I want to start with the action. And the action comes down to a very simple thing, the verb. And so when I'm directing it, I'm going to tell them a verb. And it can be as simple as, well, it's what are you doing and what do you want to get? So, for example, if there is this line, you are unbelievable, and I tell them, hey, I want you to seduce. You know, all of a sudden then it's like, I can then, in my head, I'm going, if I want to seduce with the line, you are unbelievable, it would be, you are unbelievable, right? And if you want to do, let's say, praise, you know, you want to like really celebrate them, like, oh my, what? You are unbelievable. And right there with one word, hey, praise or seduce, you're getting a fully realized delivery of the line without ever having to say, I want it quieter, or I want it slower, I want any of that. That really helps to give them a baseline of where to go with it. For example, and then like demean, let's say I want to go switch to demean, it could be, you are unbelievable. So right there, you're seeing the range and how quickly you can get to that point. The next kind of triad is the relationship. Now, it's fine to say, well, what are you doing? But then it also depends on now who you're talking to is going to make a big difference. So if you are going to demean your, let's say you're going to demean, let's say your dog did something that he shouldn't have done, right? You will come home, the dog is torn up the couch, and you're like, you're going to demean the dog, like, ah, you are unbelievable, right? But if it's your boss, and she did something, or he did something, you're going to be much more different. So depending on the context, it's going to be more of, you are unbelievable. You're going to be a little more careful. You're going to be a little more measured. And again, just with these two things of knowing who you're talking to and understanding the relationship and understanding what I'm doing, I'm beginning to then, if the verb is what I'm doing, this is going to be how I want to do it. There starts to be more clarity with the actor of knowing exactly how he wants to do it. And what's also nice about this is instead of telling them we want it quieter or slower, they start to then also have, they get to engage their own imagination. And by them engaging their imagination, a lot of times they might come up with something that I never even thought about that's better inevitably. And so the less I can say and the more that they have time to do what they want to do, inevitably better things come out of it. And when it comes to adverbs, there's one other nice little key tool, and it depends on, it's called different things in the business, but one of them is pre-life, and the other one's lead-in. And if someone's having a hard time on the line, let's say the line is unbelievable, or you are unbelievable, the pre-life would be, or I might even direct this way if they're having a hard time with it. I'll say, and if it's a relationship, and I'll be like, you know, you just hate this guy. You just hate him so much. Like, you know, you stupid, horrible piece of work, you are unbelievable. So the pre-life is you stupid, horrible piece of work. And I might even direct with them, I might give them the pre-life, so I'm not giving them a line reading, but I'm giving them an idea of the tone of the pre-life of the relationship that they might not be fully aware of. And so the pre-life would be, you stupid piece of work, and then go into the line. And then obviously, and most actors know enough to give you a little break, and you can cut that off, but that gives them, like the plane has to take off, it gives them the runway to help lock in that attitude. And again, I'm never having to give them a line reading because I'm helping them just focus in on the emotionality of the relationship and making that specific. The third one is environment and context, and this is what's going on with the character. And in video games, this is really important because if it's a war game, obviously, there's going to be a big difference between, like, bombs going on around you, people are firing guns back and forth, and you're going to have to be, I might get a little loud here. It might be like, get down, right? Because, and if he's saying, and if the actors, get down, no, it's louder than that, there's more bombs going on. So the more you can feed them with appropriate context, the more then they can adjust their performance accordingly. The other little tricky thing here, and this happens more with narration than it does with maybe like action stuff, but proximity is one thing that most people always forget. And if an actor, like right now, I'm talking, and I'm kind of talking to like the back of the room, I feel like, and my voice is a little projected, and I'm kind of really energetic, and I'm kind of pushing it out, and it would be like, hey, I really want you to understand what I'm saying because it's really, really important. You're like, whoa, back off, easy. And so a lot of times actors, maybe in the moment, they might get a little caught up. And so a lot of times I'll say, well, hey, whoever you're talking to, bring them a little closer to you. So if I'm all of a sudden talking to the front row right now, I'm going, what, do you understand what I'm saying? So I really, if you have any questions, we can talk about this and, see if we can help you out. And all of a sudden, the energy of it all of a sudden makes a big difference. I'm more drawn in. And especially like on narration, a lot of times it can be just this generic sense of I'm not really clear on who I'm talking to and where they are. If I say, hey, whoever you're talking to, bring them a little closer to you. Bring them just like right here. And if it's like right here, and let's say I'm going back to the line, you are unbelievable. Wow, you are unbelievable. And there's a whole different quality. And so again, I'm not saying, hey, be quieter, but I'm saying, hey, bring whoever you're talking to closer to you. And then not only do I get quiet, but then I also get the inferred emotional intimacy that's really what I'm wanting. And if you can say, well, hey, can you just be more intimate? That can get them there. But just by saying a simple little tangible direction that's measurable, that's external, they can then adjust accordingly. And I find that's really helpful. And going back to narration, a lot of times with narration, people might be very generic on the relationship. So two things is, one is be very specific on who you're talking to. And a lot of times they might be talking to like a generic nobody. But if I say, hey, you're talking to one person and they're really close to you, that's going to help fine tune their read. And then just some tips here. One thing I also find is a lot of times kind of a pitfall is you want to empower the actor to do their best work, and so you end up, they walk into the room and you inundate them with like a ton of information. Not a lot of it goes in, so what I always find, if at all possible, like if I'm able to run the session in the way I want to run, I'm just going to have them get on mic, give them the lines, maybe give them just a thumbnail sketch, and let them give me their first hit on the character. And what that does is saves a lot of time, because I might say, oh, this character is just really aggressive and he's really angry, and this actor might be inherently really angry, and he might come in and be like, if he comes in angry and then he's more angry, then it's too angry. So, but if he comes in and he gives me a read, then I'm able, by being able to direct in relationship to something he's already done, that just cuts through a lot of the guesswork. And then, and so instead of giving him all this information that doesn't work, I'm able to then give him information off of what he just did. And so we have like a set point, and when we can direct off of a set point, that makes things much more kind of nimble and easy to work with, because I'm not wasting time on something that's extraneous that's not going to matter to that actor. Also, the thing about it is, we have in our heads what we want it to sound like, and this is, we need to let go of control, because the minute the actor comes in, it's no longer your character. It becomes our character. And I'm not even going to say it's his character or her character, but it becomes our character. And as much as that's disconcerting, it kind of is the reality. And you can always recast, but a lot of times, it's funny, I was working on this one game, and it's from a TV show, and it was set in the South. And the main actor was, he was the lead, so they hired him to play his role. And the audio director was like, yeah, man, I just don't like, I'm not buying the accent. It doesn't sound Southern to me. Like, yeah, but I've been doing the character now for 5 years. Do you want to play the role? And I'm like, so, inevitably, the actor's going to do what the actor's going to do. They're going to have the range, and at a certain point, you just need to accept and work with instead of always having to like work against, because in your head it's not getting what you want. So there's a little bit of, just remember, there's a little bit of surrendering. And with that same kind of point of view, the other thing I want to say that's really important is the rhythm of a session. That if you're always starting and stopping, when you get into, when we get into flow, good things happen. And so if you're always nitpicking and always stopping and starting, so I guess the overall tip here is be willing to lose the battle to win the war. And so I might have in the beginning of the session, the lines might be like 80% where we want them. And I'm always making a calculus, is it really worth it to stop it to get that extra 20%? Or if I give him a little more flow and they start getting into a groove, then, you know, maybe at line 20 he's at 80%, but if I get out of the way and let him feel better about himself and get him more, like, get him into, like when you're running a marathon, when you get in like that zone, good things start to happen. And then in line 50, he's doing stuff that I maybe would have never thought about, that maybe he never would have thought about because he's in flow. And so, you know, as much as it's, and the other final tip is, as much as you can empower the least amount of people you have in the decision-making process, the more likely you can get that flow. And flow is going to be better. And then I was in another session. There was like 5 people in production. All of them very important people. All those stakeholders had an important point to say, and they needed to say it. But after every line, the line, it was like a 20-session, it was a 20-line job, I think. It took me 2 hours to get through that session. Because after every line, all 5 people stopped and they go, well, what do you think? I don't know, what do you think? What do you think? And, you know, there's, as much as that's important, the flow, the oxygen went out of the room, and consequently, I think the performance really suffered. Instead of, hey, let's just do it a million different ways and empower one person to go, hey, this is the range we want, just go get it, and then we can figure it out later. And if we get 20, do it 20 different ways, and let's just move on to the next line instead of stopping and hammering it out and then having to go back again and stop again. You know, it's like, what is it, like, good enough, don't let the enemy of good, the perfection, yeah. Good enough is good enough. With that in mind, I think that kind of covers really what I wanted to cover. Any questions? Any thoughts?
Take the mic on over. Eric, this was fantastic. Yeah, really, really great stuff.
So it's really sort of a two-part question. So first of all, do you ever give something I heard on a podcast, this was many, many years ago, from, can't remember her name now, she's a very, very famous video game voice actress. And she said one of the things that you could look at doing as an indie is getting your voice actors together, do a pizza night, give them the scripts, and then just play with them. Do you find that something like that works, letting them get together and be in character, sit around a living room and throw lines at each other?
Yeah, that sounds like a good idea. Logistically, I'm like, to get them together, and then they're going to want to probably be paid. I'm not against that idea. I think that's a great idea. I just, realistically, it feels like an uphill battle to make that happen. You know, I mean, it's not, unfortunately, we're not really doing theater. Like, if we're doing theater, there's rehearsals, and, you know, we would work that out. And there's like, theater is conducive to that because we're all getting together in the same room and working out. A lot of times with video games, we're doing solo recordings with just one person. And so, for so many reasons, it's hard to get more than one person in the room at the same time. Okay. So, yes.
Yes, it would be good if you can.
Yeah, good luck.
Okay. The other question would be, how much of that information do you give them beforehand? And how much do you find that actors will engage with, you know, like character bios or specs or information that, like the artists get, or the, you know, the programmers or level designers are getting, or is it really just get them in the room and get them going? As more time spent, as I spend more time, it's more like just get them in the room, get them going. Like I just love to get them on mic as soon as possible. Like, so if they come in and go, hey, well, tell me about the character, I might deal with that. But if they're not coming in like with needing information, take that as a clue. Like, they don't need anything from me. So get them on mic. Let me hear your first thought, and then I go from there. And then I start feeding in information as necessary. And so I might only need to give them 5 pieces of information instead of the 50 that I would have given them because I thought that's all important. It's only important if it's important to them. And if it's important to us, that doesn't make a difference. So keep it as simple as possible, which is why I always like to work off of what they do first.
I was going to ask, have you found it helpful to have like music playing in context sometime, or like certain effects processing if they're like, their voice is some kind of monster, robot, whatnot, to have that in their ears?
Okay, well, you know, a lot of times music will bleed in through the headphones, and so I probably don't do that. A lot of times that really isn't kind of the case. And a lot of times if the actor's good, you're not going to need that. If it's for a narration, that could actually be kind of interesting because that music is so important and integral to the narration. And one other thing, a lot of times you also, speaker, like headphones, no headphones. Let me come back to that. Remind me, I'll come back to that. But sometimes, it depends. Like sometimes, there's been like a robot or there's been something that, like a monster voice, and we know we're going to process it really hardly, in a big, robust way. I've gone both ways where I've given the actor, we do a rough version of the process and we feed that into his headphones. So in real time, he's hearing that processed end result. And that does help to inform and more importantly, it probably helps me more than him or her. But then sometimes some actors are like, oh man, that gets in my way, doesn't help me. Or sometimes they're just completely neutral about it. In that case, what I would suggest is have that ready for the actor and then see if that helps you and if it helps them. And if it helps both, then do it. And if it doesn't, don't. And then the final thing, I want to go back to the headphones, no headphones. So, a lot of voiceover actors, they love their headphones. And sometimes, some are neutral, but a lot of times, if you wear your own headphones, you start to hear your voice, and you're going to start to like, oh, I sound really good. And you start to monitor yourself. So a lot of times, if the actor's really hung up and stuck, and maybe they're a little green, don't give them headphones if you can all avoid it, because especially when the actor's not proficient and they can get in there. If they're in their heads and they have their headphones, the first thing I do is, hey, let's take them off. And that's going to help. And if worse comes to worse and they're really tanking and they're really green, and the way the room is set up, you only can talk back with the headphones. Worst comes to worst, and if it's really like a disaster, go in the room with them. And also, if I go with them, if I'm with them, then the relationship starts to become much more real, and then that helps to kind of alleviate them because they're no longer sitting there by themselves in this disembodied booth with nothing to hold on to, and they now have a relationship that they can connect with.
Thank you.
Yeah, great. Other questions? I guess I have one final question. Just the relationship with the producers. You were talking about people kind of tanking a session, when they all have their feedback. How do you kind of control or relate with other people who are in the room with you who want to interject and who want to, basically break the flow of the session, but they're more important than you, they're paid more than you, how do you manage that?
Delicately.
Yeah.
You know what? I don't got an answer for you on that, other than delicately, because you know what? And to a certain extent, I just always need to remember I'm there to serve the project. And if there's sometimes there's some important information that I wasn't really aware of that the producer that I thought was, they're being very finicky. All of a sudden I go, no, that was really valuable, important information that I didn't know about. So I would say the way to counteract that is if you can get a pre-meeting. The more I can get inside their head, the more they don't need to tell me stuff. And so the more pre-meetings I can get where, like, what do you want? What are you going for? What don't you want? What don't you like? The more I can get a relationship going, chances are the better things we're going to be. Sometimes it's just hard. And in those times, it's just hard. Kind of is what it is. And because you're right, it's their project. I'm a guest. So if I'm a guest in the house, I'm not going to tell them how to clean their dishes, So I'm like, cool, that's what we do here.
For sure. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Eric. This was really, really informative, fantastic. Thanks.
Thank you.